Hello and welcome to an ESG video discussion looking at the impacts and implications of emerging trends in big data and storage. I'm your host, Scott Sinclair, a storage analyst at ESG. I'm joined by my fellow storage analysts, Terri, McClure, and Mark Peters, along with our big data analyst, Nick Rouda. Today's theme is how big data has different needs than those served by traditional storage. Mark, can you please provide a perspective on how big data is impacting storage?
The easy answer is it's not just big data, it's typically bigger data. And that has tremendous implications from both a performance and a cost perspective. And I think what this means is we're looking at more of a hierarchical approach to storage. Typically, we have over the last few decades talked about storage as if it's one homogeneous mass. And really there are two aspects to storage, and these play exactly when you're talking about big data. There's the doing something aspect of storage, and then there's the storing storage, the storing and retaining data. And those two things are very different. And with big data and the analytical aspect of big data, that's the crux here. We're talking and looking about this in two different ways. Obviously there's in-memory processing that goes on, but when it actually comes to what we more regularly regard as storage, we're now looking perhaps to use more flash in terms of that active use of I/O, that active use of the data, and more of a low cost tier for the bulk of retention. We'll be looking more at fast storage, fast data access for, if you like, the analytical side of big data, and then bulk storage will be off not just sitting on a shelf somewhere. It needs to be an active archive of some sort because it might still be needed, but we'll be focusing very much more on the cost there and the performance for the analytical side.
Terri, do you have anything to add?
Well, it's an interesting question because as we see storage vendors start to roll solutions out to the market, there's this aspect of HSM and this aspect of tiering that Mark talked about, but we're also seeing vendors come to market with network storage solutions to use for analytics. And let's think about that when you start looking at things like in the Hadoop world, where the entire value prop is I can analyze more data quicker on commodity hardware. And the reason I can do it is because I'm spreading my compute load across a bunch of commodity nodes with a bunch of DAS. But what we're seeing there is vendors come to market with new solutions to address those types of use cases where they introduce network storage infrastructures to support Hadoop operations. Now there's some trade-offs to taking these types of approaches. One is that you lose the locality of reference advantage you have by doing the compute and the storage on the same nodes, and all the cool Hadoop things that it does related to name nodes and lookups and all things like that. And you gain some latency by going out over the network to get at your storage. But the trade-off is, the benefit is, if you're going to some sort of a unified storage platform, you can store the data once and not, a lot of the vendors are supporting multiple protocols, multiple access protocols, and letting you share the data between HDFS and NFS and CIFS and maybe even object storage. So you're storing the data once and accessing it by many different access methods. And that's kind of cool in that you don't have to do the ETL processes to be able to extract the data, load it into a Hadoop file system, and do your analytics then. So you save some time on the ETL process. You save some cost associated with having not a separate storage stovepipe for HDFS. So there's some trade-offs. You might get a little bit more latency, but you get some economies associated with having one storage container instead of multiple storage containers, and by being able to do data-in-place analytics instead of extracting and transforming and loading the data into something else. So we're seeing some interesting architectural approaches now to supporting different types of analytics applications such as that.
Okay, thanks, Terri. So Mark, can you provide some perspective on how we differentiate between big data, meaning the jobs, the applications, the analysis, from big data, meaning the massive growth in storage? And do we even need to?
Frankly, no. There are some other issues that we might touch on in terms of the needs of the resulting applications, but I think the essence for storage is pretty much the same. Whether it is big data driven by the current capital B, capital D big data, or whether it's massive amounts of data driven by the sheer growth, expectations, mobility, everyone producing data all over the place. I think the necessity to manage it efficiently is exactly the same as I was talking about a minute or two ago. This means more focus on looking at storage and data management either as very active and therefore going on to, if you like, a higher tier of storage, typically deploying flash in some form or fashion, probably still as a hybrid infrastructure, whether or not it's all flash arrays or whether it's flash instituted within an array. And then the bulk going somewhere else. Now, somewhere else could be big fat drives, it could still be tape, it can all be managed these days both by file and object and RESTful interfaces and so on. So there is still a way to bring it all together, but we certainly look at it and putting it in different places.
Thanks, Mark. So Nick, how can incumbent storage providers make themselves more relevant to this emerging world of big data?
That's a great question, Scott. I mean, I think one of the most important things is to recognize you're not talking solely to the storage buyer anymore. Big data projects by their nature are extremely collaborative and interdisciplinary. Although when we survey customers, 80% of the time they'll say it's important or crucial to have the storage team involved as stakeholders, they're not necessarily running the show. And that has big implications for storage vendors that will want to reach out to different audiences. A DBA, a data scientist, even a CIO may not appreciate some of the operational considerations of storage, and they'll need to be educated. So things like cost, performance, scalability, reliability, terms that the storage industry likes to focus on as key values all day, they need to figure out how to communicate that to these different audiences. It would be a rare data scientist who's spending a lot of their time thinking about high availability, data protection, disaster recovery. So how do you inform and educate and show value and differentiation in those areas? That's a key challenge for storage vendors to address.
Thanks, Nick. So Mark, are storage vendors really not the drivers of big data strategy?
Well, I'm going to sort of answer that question and then broaden it out if I can, Scott, if you don't mind. Quite frankly, the storage vendors shouldn't be the drivers of this. The drivers of this should be application needs, user needs, and yes, from the vendor perspective, they should just be the recipients. Now, can they help in terms of improving all the hierarchical attributes, the ability to tier, for example? Categorically they can. But I think the other question I want to sort of address in this is also whether end users themselves are merely the recipients. You know, if you are a storage manager or an IT infrastructure manager and you're merely getting dumped upon, then it's too late. Now, I'm hoping one of the values of this sort of discussion, this sort of video, is that it may be cathartic for some people, realizing they're not the only ones who don't always know everything that's going on. But nonetheless, the simple advice, the very direct advice, and it's very straightforward, is to ensure that the infrastructure part of an organization and the application side of an organization are actually talking. Now, if you do that, you as the infrastructure person will not be surprised by the application needs. You will therefore not just be the recipient of extra requirements which require flexibility and so on, and sudden demands, unexpected demands. You should know those at least better up front, and then you in turn can apply those to your vendors. Now, as I say, the vendors themselves may be coming up with ways to help with this, but they should really be responding to user needs rather than the other way around.
Thanks, Mark. This has been an excellent conversation, and thank you for joining us, and please stay tuned for other videos in this series.